I am assuming that most people here write. Some people knew that they were going to be writers from a very early age and went off in that direction. I didn't go off in any particular direction because I didn't know I wanted to write. That came later. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm not from around here. I'm originally Canadian, came over from Canada, moved to the UK, lived and worked in London for 25 years, and then moved to Thanet. The move to Thanet, it was a new beginning, a new chapter in life, and I thought, oh, I should get fit, I should do something. And I looked around for exercise classes. And I tasted a few exercise classes and decided that I wanted to take Zumba because it was fun and I liked the music. One day, a woman came up to me. It was break time, and she came up to me and she said, "Do you write?" Well, I was a little taken aback and said, "Yes, I haven't written anything creative in years." The woman was the late Hilary McBride, and she was one of the founding members of I'll Write. She invited me along to a writing group. The writing group met on the third Wednesday of every month. It still does meet on the third Wednesday of every month. And so I went along. I had no idea what to expect. I'd never been to a writing group before. So, Hilary and another woman called Jill Smith, who I was to meet later and befriend, opened the meeting. They made introductions, they gave writing news, they found out who'd written, and made a list. So, they invited people who had written to hand out their pieces and to read them aloud. People read their poems or their short stories aloud, and I was amazed because some of them were very good. Some weren't, but some were very good. The members of the group gave their comments and were supportive. The criticism or remarks were constructive, and I thought, oh, okay. At the end of the meeting, Hilary announced that the topic for the next meeting and for the anthology they were going to work on was Thanet. And I thought about it and thought, can I write something? Can I write something about Thanet? I didn't know Thanet very well at the time, but I thought, oh well, I'll give it a go. And I wrote a scene. I wrote a scene about a father and daughter on the beach in Thanet. I knew about beaches and I'd seen parents on the beaches, so I thought, okay, I'll write a scene about Thanet. So, after 25 years of not writing anything creative, I wrote something. And why did I do that? I wrote something because someone had asked. I wrote something because I was given a topic. It was a given thing. I didn't have to dither about thinking, oh, what am I going to write? It was a given, so I knew I was going to write about this, even though I didn't know too much about Thanet. And I was given a deadline, and I've always been really, really good at deadlines. Now, I mentioned I wrote a scene rather than a short story or a poem, and that goes back to something else. And I'll take a little detour in my journey now and talk about my earlier life in Canada. I was always, and have been always, I still am, a theatre person. My roots are deep in theatre. I love theatre. I like going to plays, and as a young person, I was interested in being in plays, which amazed my mother because I was a painfully shy child and an adolescent, but I could hide myself in a role. So I love theatre. I studied theatre at university, learned how to build a character from the inside out to make the dialogue my own. So theatre was something I liked. In the real world, I went out there as an actor and was very fortunate and got roles, mainly new plays. I started, I ended up in a company, a theatre company that specialized in new plays, most written by their resident playwright. I loved it. I loved the collaborative spirit. I loved the feel of the rehearsal room. I loved the rewriting, the input that was expected from actors, the rewrites and the re-rehearsals. I really enjoyed that. And then going out there and it was your piece of writing. I approached the artistic director at the end of the season about writing a play myself. I hadn't written a play, but I thought, I had a topic, I wanted to write about it. He teamed me up with another writer, and we started to write this play. I won't go into it, but it was about the pipeline in the Mackenzie Valley in Canada. But I was obsessed by this at the time, so, and people's reaction to it. So anyway, I wrote this play, and I had a topic, I had support, and I had a deadline. It was going to be done the next season. So I wrote it, and I was lucky. It was produced, and it toured for 6 months, and then another theatre did it as well later. So I'd written a play with help. I went on to, the artistic director asked me if I could write something for 3 actors, 3 women. And I did, because he asked me, and because I had a deadline, and I knew the cast size, so I wrote. It was no big deal. I moved away from the company, moved into directing, worked for a theatre company, was brought in to start a resident company, and so I did that. I moved away from acting. Writing, I continued. If I was asked to write something, or if something was required to be written because a playwright hadn't produced. And so I'd write. I wrote because I was asked, and it needed to be done. By the time I left Canada and moved to here, I had 5 plays professionally produced in multiple productions. So, but I didn't consider myself to be a writer. I was a theatre person, and I just happened to write because it was required, it was needed. That's what I did. So, moved to London, and again, I was fortunate to find work in theatre, not on the creative side, on the management side. So I worked running theatres in London, and later I wrote proposals, and I wrote reports, and I wrote funding applications, but I didn't write anything creative, although some people might say a funding application creative writing, but anyway. I was then hired as a drama officer at the Arts Council in London in the main office, and my job was to provide advice and support to theatre practitioners. Also, part of my job was to see plays. I mean, what a wonderful job, you know, to go out there and see plays. It was something that I couldn't believe I was being paid for such a thing. But I didn't write. And so the move here, and do you write? Yes, but nothing creative. So I started going to I'll Write, a supportive group of people. They gave me deadlines. I wrote to those deadlines. I tried writing a number of different things. I started writing poetry. I started writing short fiction. I started writing flash fiction. I always preferred to write dialogue, but I sort of moved out of my comfort zone a bit. A couple of years into it, oh, I should mention that the piece I wrote, that little scene, was published by the Isle Writers in their next anthology, so that gave me a bit of confidence, and so I did continue to write. A couple of years later, I noticed that there was a writing class being offered as part of adult education. And I looked up the tutor and looked up what the course was about and thought, okay, I'll enroll. And the tutor was Rupa Faruqi, who is local, and she is brilliant. She's very sensitive, and if you haven't heard of her, look her up. If she ever does a creative writing course again, go along, try it. I found it very stimulating. One of the things that I think about when I think about Rupa was she gave us a lot of different things to think about, and we looked at different writers. But I had to write on an object sometime. You see an object and you write about an object. Now, this was very challenging for me because I didn't write descriptive things. I wrote dialogue. It wasn't really part of my comfort zone. But I thought, okay, I'm going to write about an object, and I chose an object, a figurine of a young woman in a long flowing dress, a china figurine, and the woman's holding her bonnet, and I thought, that's an interesting object. But I wrote it from the eyes of a young girl, a young Canadian girl. I created a character called Mary Margaret. And it was her feelings about this figurine, which was just lovely. It was a beautiful figurine. But Mary Margaret began to think that this lovely creature was everything that she was not, everything that her great-aunt wanted her to be. Well-mannered, full of grace, and silent. So, this story went down okay, and I began to write more Mary Margaret stories. It happened whenever a topic was given at Isle-Write, I think about, oh, can I write about this topic? I don't know. What would Mary Margaret think about this? And so I'd write a Mary Margaret story. And people came to expect them, and sometimes were disappointed when it wasn't a Mary Margaret story. And people said, maybe you should, you read these stories really well. Maybe you should record them. And I thought, no, I'm not going to record these. I'm not going to record these. But it put something in my head, and I began to think, well, maybe I should record these. Maybe I should do this. So I thought about it. I put some of the Mary Margaret stories to one side and wrote some more that fit in sort of an order. And I recorded them. My husband found a studio for me. We went in. He did incidental music for it, and we produced this CD. So I had a CD, but it didn't really, I didn't think it was enough. So I had a book created, a book that the CD could go inside. I couldn't find a publisher to do something this bespoke, so I went to a local printer who considered it a challenge. So we came out with this book with this CD inside, and I did all the things that you apparently should. I got an ISBN number, it went off to the British Library. I did a launch here, and it went well, so that was nice. And everyone said, so when are you going to do one of these things again, where you come and you read your stories, read this? And I thought, I don't know, I hadn't thought about doing any others. So I looked around, and I thought, maybe I could do this, but I'd have to do some more work. I have to be a little bit more professional. I should have a website, and I should have a card. So I decided, okay, I'll do a card, a business card. What's my business? Writing? Yeah, maybe I am a writer. And so that's what I did. I did a business card, might have one here. It has my name on it, Patricia Mahoney, writer. And it has the book and the little figurine on it of the lady. And so I had this now, and I went out in the world and I gave talks, these spoken word events, and I was lucky. I did them in a number of places, did them at Conquest House in Canterbury, the Germain Street Theatre in London, Whitstable Literary Festival, the POW Festival. I went around, and community groups. I did a lot in community groups. So I was out there and I was doing this. And I continued to go to Isle-Write. Of course I went to Isle-Write. Isle-Write gave me, ideas, things to do. They pushed me in other directions. They suggested, why don't you try writing in the second person? Now, This I found to be one of the most difficult things I ever tried to do, write a story in second person. I came to love this. I found it was really good for short fiction pieces, little flash bits. Didn't work in anything long term, but it worked. So they gave me ideas. The writers in Isle gave me ideas and feedback, and it felt good. I still wanted more, and like some others, I looked around for different things, and we just happened, a friend and I, who's here, we decided to go to the Margate Bookie. And we went to a number of events. This was a year ago, more than a year ago. And there, we went to the launch of Shoal. And we were quite impressed by Thanet Writer's first anthology. We thought, oh, this is good. And more impressed by the enthusiasm of the writers and also the host, Seb Riley. And we thought, this is very interesting. I decided to go along to a Thanet Writers meeting. Went to a pub, the Chapel, on a Thursday night, went there, met with people, group of people, and people presented things that they had written, and silence happened as everyone read them. People didn't read them aloud, it was in silence, and people wrote them up, and then they gave their comments. And I thought, okay, but I read mine aloud. So I read my things aloud, and the comments, they were very good. They were, I appreciated the feedback I was getting, and I went to that first one and I received feedback, and I thought, that's right. Not all of it, but some of it I thought, that's good, that's good. And I went and I rewrote the piece and brought it back to another session. And the piece was eventually published online by Thanet Writers, and some of my other pieces were written online, were picked up online, and that was all very good. And then I began to think about competitions. A number of my friends had won competitions. And I thought, I wonder if I should enter some competitions. And then I thought, when you submit something to a competition, it's the written word. I'm not speaking it. If I'm speaking it, I can influence how it's received. If I'm not speaking it, if it's on the page, then what do they actually think about it without me having read it? And I decided, okay, I'm going to Thanet Writers, and I'm not going to read this piece. I'm going to do as everyone else and just hand it out and see if it stands on its own. I needed to know this. And so I started doing that, and I started entering competitions, and suddenly I began to do a bit better. I was, in this past year when I started doing that, I was shortlisted for one thing, Writing Magazine, and won another award not long ago, a writing award, a fiction award. And so I thought, well, that makes some sense. So that's good. I found I benefited from belonging to writing groups. I continue to go to Thanet Writers. I continue to go to Isle Write. They both give me completely different things that I appreciate very much. I also edit more. I edit more and more and more and more. I write, I edit, I edit, I edit. I keep paring it down to something that I can be happy with. And I read aloud. I read the things over and over and over again to make sure that there's a flow there, that my characters have a rhythm. I'm very keen on characters having a certain rhythm. I won't go into that. I wrote an essay. Thanet Writers asked me if I could. I got into discussion at one session and about characters, and a belief that I've always had, that every person has their own music, their own rhythm, and I believe that with characters as well. And so I've done some work on that. So they said, write an essay. So I wrote an essay and submitted it, and they put it online. But writing aloud is something, reading aloud is very important to me, and editing is really important to me. So that's my journey at the moment. I write a lot more than I ever wrote before. Well, I hadn't written anything in 25 years when I got to Thanet, so things have changed. I now consider myself a writer, and I became a writer in Thanet, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.